After studying this module, you will be able to understand the concept of privatization, identify the issues and trends of privatization, assess the impact of privatization on economic environment, and critically evaluate the different forms or methods of privatization adopted in India. Today, the pace of economic change is far rapid than at any point of time in history of the world. With the passage of time, the economies of the world are getting further integrated and interlinked. Lesser government involvement is desired in the business of the world. Since the privatization wave across the world, the famous quote cited here can be, "The business of government is not to be in business." This has been said by John Moore, and this seems to hold more relevance these days. In order to diversify the economy of the government of India has been working towards privatization. Let us begin by understanding the meaning of the word privatization. The transfer of ownership, management and control of an enterprise from the public sector to private sector is called as privatization. The main aim of the private sector enterprises is to earn profits. There are different names of privatization in different countries of the world, such as in England it is called as denationalization. In Australia it is called as prioritization. In New Zealand as asset sale program. In Mexico as disincorporation, and in Sri Lanka as peopleization. Let us understand trends and issues related to privatization. Since 1991, there had been a marked change in the perception towards the role of public sector in Indian economy. Some economists argued that the financial crisis in the year 1991 was the result of inefficiency and ineffectiveness of public sector enterprises. Insufficient growth in productivity, poor project performance, lack of continuous technological upgradation, inadequate attention towards research and development, and low rate of return on capital investment were the serious problems associated to public sector enterprises. As a result, rather than being an asset to the government, public sector enterprises have become a burden. Consequently, the new industrial policy of the year 1991 advocated privatization of public sector enterprises. In order to achieve privatization, the government adopted the route of disinvestment, that is, the sale of public sector equity to private sector and public at large. Since the start of economic liberalization, the evolution of privatization policy in India can be outlined as number 1. During the year 1991-92, the Government of India initiated a policy to divest up to 20% of its equity in selected PSUs to mutual funds, institutional investors as well as to workers of these firms. As a result, the shares of different PSUs are bundled together and sold to domestic financial institutions. Later, in order to ensure better prices in the year 1992-93, individual shares were auctioned separately. 2. in order to suggest the correct method of disinvestiture in the year 1993, the Government of India appointed a committee on disinvestment in public sector enterprises under the chairmanship of C. Rangarajan. The committee recommended that up to 49% of the equity could be divested in industries reserved for public sector, and in exceptional cases it could go up to 74% of the equity that could be divested. For the industries not reserved for public sector, 100% of equity could be divested. Industries reserved for public sector were coal, minerals and oils, ornaments, atomic energy, radioactive minerals, railways, etc. But the Government of India did not act on these recommendations. 3. In order to draw a long-term disinvestment program for the PSUs, the Government of India constituted a 5-member Public Sector Disinvestment Commission under the chairmanship of G.V. Ramakrishnan in August 1996. The Commission recommended strategic sales with transfer of management and disinvestment of 58 different PSUs. By the year 1996-97, the sale of PSUs was open to NRIs and the foreigners and through global depository receipts in the international markets. 4. In the year 1998-99, the government had decided that in generality of cases, the government shareholdings in PSUs will be brought down to 26%. But in cases of strategic considerations, the government will continue to retain majority holdings, and in all the cases the workers shall be protected. 5. In the year 1999, the government announced the classification of industries into strategic and non-strategic areas. Strategic industries include arms and ammunition and related defense industries, atomic energy, mining of minerals for atomic industry, the railway transport, etc. All other industries were classified as non-strategic. In case of non-strategic industries, the government shareholdings could be dropped to as low as 26% on a case-to-case basis. 6. Up to the year 2001, in some cases the government stake dropped even below 26%. 7. In the year 2003-2004, the Supreme Court legitimized the privatization procedure and refused to second-guess the government with respect to privatization policy. 8. From 1st April 2005, the government approved the constitution of a national investment fund that comprises of the proceeds from disinvestment of public sector undertakings. The fund is managed by public sector financial entities. 75% of the returns of the fund can be applied to promote education, health and employment, whereas the remaining 25% can be applied to meet the capital investment requirements of the profitable and revival public sector units. 9. The Finance Minister announced the intention to disinvest 10% of the government-owned equity in BHEL. However, this move was dropped after the protest from left parties. 10. Another attempt was made in June 2006 regarding the sale of 10% stake in two profit-making non-Navratna companies like NALCO and in Orissa and NLC in Tamil Nadu. However, the move was dropped because of indefinite strike by NLC workers. 11. The Prime Minister decided to keep hold on all the disinvestment proposals and decisions pending further review on June 2006. 12. However, the interest in disinvestment has again revived, and during the year 2009-10, the government expressed its intention to raise rupees 1,25,000 crores through this means. The shares in many PSEs like Oil India Limited, NHPC, NTPC and REC, that is Rural Electrification Corporation, have been sold. 13. In the budget for the year 2010-11, the Finance Minister had kept a target of rupees 40,000 crores for disinvestment. Let us now assess the impact of privatization on economic environment. There was a great deal of controversy among economists, political thinkers and policy makers on the issue of privatization. Privatization has both supporters as well as opponents. Some are of the opinion that privatization is the only way to get rid of inefficiency, incompetency and losses of public sector enterprises which are mounting. On the other hand, some are of the opinion that privatization is anti-labor and anti-welfare and that will cause sufferings to the people. The impact of privatization is both positive as well as negative, that is summarized as it leads to more efficiency. Private enterprises are faced with severe competition in the market. Therefore, in order to survive or grow, they are compelled to make all kinds of improvements in their organization and management. Thus, in turn, it leads to increase in efficiency and performance of private sector enterprises. Next, it resulted in less wastage and reduced costs. The private enterprises are based on the basic principle of profit maximization. Therefore, in order to make profit, the private sector will make all efforts to reduce costs. The costs can be reduced by minimizing wastages and adopting cost-saving techniques. Next, it does not involve political interference. In private sector enterprises, there is no political interference as compared to public enterprises in which political interference is very common. The political interference was the major cause for the poor performance of the public sector enterprises. And since there is no political interference for private sector units, they can work freely and can take their decisions on time. Fourth, it leads to flexibility in decision making. Timely and prompt decisions are very important for a successful business. In case of public sector enterprises, decision making is very time consuming and lengthy, as government and various other agencies were involved. But in case of private sector enterprises, decisions are taken quickly, promptly and in the shortest possible time, as they have properly delegated authority and command structure. Thus, private sector units can respond to the changing business environment almost immediately. Next, it is beneficial to customers. The main objective of private sector is to maximize profits, and this sector cannot succeed unless they are able to improve customer satisfaction. Therefore, with a view to increase their sales and performance, the management of private sector units would have to ensure customer satisfaction. Next, responsibility and accountability. In private sector enterprises, the delegation of responsibility and accountability is properly defined. So, in this type of organization, it is very easy to hold people accountable for their decisions and actions. Next, capacity to raise funds. The performance of the private sector enterprise decides their capacity to raise funds from the capital market, and also there is a system of incentives in the working of these enterprises. Therefore, they are forced to perform well. Next, no mismatch between production and demand. A private sector unit produces and sells only those goods that ensure maximum returns. Therefore, these units try that there is no mismatch between what people demand and what industry produces for them. Thus, in turn, it assures that there is no wastage or shortages. Let us now consider some negatives of privatization. Number 1. It ignores social welfare. The main motive of private sector is to earn profit. So, it is quite possible that the motive of profit may sometimes go against the motive of social welfare. For example, the production and price of some goods which are regulated by the government so that they are in reach of common people, but otherwise they would become unaffordable to the poor. Next, unemployment and poverty would increase because of privatization. Private entrepreneurs use capital intensive techniques in pursuit of cost reduction and higher profitability. In these capital intensive techniques, the number of workers employed is smaller as compared to those enterprises where labor intensive techniques are used. And also, the private sector cannot compromise on efficiency for the sake of generating employment. So, the reduction in employment causes loss of means of living for workers as well as their family members. This would result in spread of poverty. Now let us consider different forms or methods of privatization which are adopted in India. The different forms or method of privatization are initial public offering, referred to as IPO. This is the most important method used for privatization. Under this method, the shares of public sector undertakings are sold to retail investors and institutions. The government may in some cases sell shares of a public sector unit in international market also. The IPO method is the best method in case of those countries which have a strong capital market. This method provides many advantages which are: number 1, it ensures wide participation of retail investors. 2, it is likely to face less resistance from the PSU employees as there is continuity in the management. 3, it can be used to offer shares to the employees. 4, it can be employed successfully or usefully in those cases where the government wants or desires to raise resources but does not want to lose control of the enterprise. The various problems faced under this method are: number 1, the main problem of this method is the problem of valuation, that is, what should be the price of the share. Since in most countries the shares of PSU are not traded on stock exchanges, it is not possible to find out the right price at which the government should sell the shares of the PSU. Because of this problem, the government of India actually obtained much less through disinvestment as it could have otherwise. 2. This method cannot be adopted in small countries with weak capital markets and institutions. Strategic sales. In this method, the government sells its shares in the PSU to a strategic partner. As a result, the management passes over to the buyer. The various advantages of this method are: number 1, the performance and efficiency of the enterprise is expected to improve as the private partner introduces better management practices on the one hand, and the unit is freed from the government shackles on the other hand. 2. The government may realize a better price as the strategic partner may be willing to pay more because of the synergy he perceives in combining the PSU business with his own existing business. 3. The strategic partner would be willing to inject more capital into the PSU and modernize its business operations as he would be keen in generating profits. 4. Loss-making PSUs will be unattractive to the public, whereas a strategic acquirer can have the skills to turn around the business even after paying a reasonable price. 5. This method is most important method of disinvestment in small countries with weak capital and for those countries where shares of PSUs are not traded. The various disadvantages of this method are: number 1, this method is unfair as many ordinary citizens cannot participate in it. 2. The whole process of selecting a strategic partner and setting the terms of sale depends on the ministers and officials. Thus, the whole process is non-transparent and arbitrary. 3. Since it is very difficult to assess the actual value of the enterprise, the strategic partner often convinces the government officials to get control over the company at a value far less than the actual value of the enterprise. As a result, the government gets far less realization from the strategic sales vis-a-vis the actual value. 4. The acquisition of a PSU with a significant market share by a partner in a similar business can lead to a monopolistic situation which can be harmful to the customer interests. 5. There is a serious risk of employees losing their jobs as the strategic partner is likely to restructure the PSU business to align with his own existing business. 6. Once even a small part of the equity is sold to a strategic partner, other potential bidders will be put off, thereby lowering the value of the rest of the PSU's shares. Smaller countries, especially those in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, have often relied more on the method of strategic sale to privatize their PSUs. This is due to the reason that most of these countries did not have well developed capital markets, and also the shares of the PSUs were not traded. Let us now discuss the next method, that is sale to foreigners. This is a variant of the strategic sales method where the buyer is not a domestic company but a foreign company. In small countries, the amount of domestic private capital is often limited. Therefore, the government sells its stakes to a foreign company. Sales to foreign company is preferred as the expectation is that the foreign company will bring with it world-class technology and expertise to run the PSU. Government of India has done this in case of Maruti Udyog, where it has sold its stake to foreign collaborator Suzuki, which is a company of Japan. Next, we will understand the other method, that is management employees buyouts. In this method of privatization, management and employees themselves buy major stakes in the public sector undertakings. Advantages of this method are: number 1, this method is easy to implement both politically and technically. 2, there will be better corporate governance if insiders have better access than outsiders to the information needed to monitor managers. Disadvantages of this method are: number 1, government may tend to charge low prices to insiders and thus realize less revenue. 2, managers and employees can block the entry of outsiders. Number 3, outsiders may hesitate to invest in firms with significant insider ownership. Next method of privatization is auction. Auction is one of the methods for divesting shares under market sale where the sale proceeds are maximized through bidding. It is less time consuming and involves low transaction cost. It is targeted at the institutional investors. In the initial round of disinvestment, government divested its stake in PSUs through this method. When in the year 1993, the government appointed a committee on disinvestment in public sector enterprises, the committee suggested that the best method for disinvestment is by offering the shares to the general public at a fixed price through a general prospectus. Since these shares were not traded on stock market, it would be difficult to decide the fixed price. Till a normal trading atmosphere is created, the auction method with wide participation may be adopted. The Government of India basically adopted two methods of disinvestment. Number 1, selling of shares of selected public sector enterprises. 2, strategic sale of a public sector undertaking to a private sector company. The first method was adopted over the periods from 1991-92 and 1998-99, and since 1999-2000, emphasis shifted to second method. Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. The transfer of ownership, management and control of an enterprise from public sector to private sector is called privatization. The new industrial policy of 1991 advocated privatization of public sector enterprises. Privatization has both supporters as well as opponents. Some are of the opinion that privatization is the only way to get rid of inefficiency, incompetency and mounting losses of the public sector enterprises. On the other hand, some are of the opinion that privatization is anti-labor and anti-welfare that will cause suffering to the people. Initial public offerings, strategic sale, sale to foreigners, management employee buyouts, auction are the methods used or forms used for privatization. Under the initial public offering method, the shares of public sector undertakings are sold to retailers, investors and institutions. In some cases, the government may also sell shares in international market. In strategic sales, the government sells its shares in the PSU to a strategic partner. Sale to foreigners is a variant of strategic sales method where the buyer is not a domestic company but happens to be a foreign company. Under the management employee buyout method, the management and employees themselves buy major stakes in the public sector undertaking. Under the auction method of privatization, the sales proceeds are maximized through bidding. In India, initial public offering method was adopted over the periods 1991-92, 1998-99 and since 1999-2000, emphasis shifted to the strategic sales method.